Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today to discuss Title IX, the 1972 landmark sex equality law, and the impact of the Biden-Harris administration's new regulations that take effect tomorrow, August 1st. The regulations have been temporarily paused in 21 states so far, though we believe it should be all 50. Here at Independent Women's Forum, we've had a busy summer sounding the alarm about these unethical changes to Title IX, most notably through the Our Bodies, Our Sports Take Back Title IX Summer 2024 bus tour. The tour, organized and led by Independent Women's Forum, traveled throughout 30 states in 30 days, featuring the voices of over 50 renowned female athletes, coaches, and women's advocates to shed light on the consequences of the illegal changes to Title IX and the threat to women and girls' sex-based rights in education. One of the athletes with us for much of the tour was Independent Women's Forum Ambassador Riley Gaines. Riley is a 12-time All-American swimmer, 5-time SEC champion and record holder, host of Games for Girls on Outkick, and plaintiff in Gaines et al. Versus NCAA. Riley will lead today's call. Riley, thanks, as always, for all of your hard work to stand up for women and girls and calling attention to the most anti-woman pursuit carried out by the Biden-Harris administration. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Lynn, and of course everyone at IWF for all of the work that you've been doing over the course of the bus tour, but certainly much longer than that. I'm thrilled to be on today for a discussion on such an important topic, a topic I imagine that many people on this call, even a matter of 5-10 years ago, would have never in a million years thought we would have to have, but it is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I am where I am today in both my personal life, my career, because of Title IX and the opportunity that I had to swim at the University of Kentucky. And because Title IX was not upheld during my final collegiate year of swimming, and I was forced to not only compete against a male athlete, but also undress before him, without consent, might I add, in our locker room. When sex is replaced with gender identity, which is effectively what the Biden-Harris administration has done, reality is rejected and objective truth is denied. In an attempt to be more inclusive of those who self-identify or merely claim to claim our identities, or really anything other than their sex. Reminder, there are only two of those, that being male and female. Our leaders are not considering women. They're not considering the discrimination against women on the basis of our sex, not considering the sheer unfairness of stripping away our equal rights. And in my case, our case as athletes, our right to equal athletic competition. This is precisely what we're seeing play out from the Biden-Harris administration. And again, the most anti-woman, anti-reality pursuit we have seen from this administration. 52 years of federal protections under Title IX on the basis of sex that have been safeguarded women's equal opportunities in education is eliminated beginning tomorrow. While the Biden-Harris administration disingenuously claims that their new rule doesn't apply to sports, they've established the default position that school activities limited to women only or men only are presumptively discriminatory. The Biden-Harris administration has repeatedly insisted in court filings and in public pronouncements that Title IX requires schools to allow males who identify as trans to play in women's sports. They cannot have it both ways. Either they use Title IX to force schools to allow men on women's sports teams, or if they are not, then schools should stop the madness right now. Very excited for the lineup of experts. I call them that. I mean, these are women who are incredibly talented, accomplished in their athletic field, of course, policymakers, legal experts, all on today's call. And so it is my pleasure, it is my honor to introduce one of the greatest tennis players of all time. This is someone who I greatly respect and look up to. And, of course, that is none other than Martina Navratilova. She is a founding member of the Women's Sports Policy Working Group. She joined us for the Take Back Title IX bus tour stop in Washington, D.C. As part of the Our Bodies, Our Sports Coalition. And so, Martina, thank you again for joining us and for continuing to stand up for those who seek to eliminate women's equal opportunities and for being just an unapologetic advocate for women and girls in sports. Would you be willing to tell us a little bit about why you're so passionate about this issue and why you're in the fight to protect women?
Well, thank you for having me. I think the answer is obvious. I've been fighting for fairness all my life. That's been kind of my North Star, what's fair. And it's clearly obvious that it is not fair for women to have to compete against men, for females to compete against males in any sport, other than maybe equestrian, where strength doesn't matter. Every other sport, strength or height or wingspan all come into play. I hate that it's become a political situation. You mentioned the Biden administration on this. I feel that the Democrats have kind of been captured by the trans lobby, who have been very organized for decades now, and people just have not paid enough attention to what it actually does to women. I would think, you know how you feel now about Title IX maybe being overturned. I know how I felt when Roe v. Wade was overturned a couple of years ago. So, I think this has been an attack on women from both the left and the right, and I think the left just doesn't recognize it, and I hope they start paying attention. I know there are some people on the Democratic side that agree with me. However, they are too scared to speak out because of the repercussions politically. So it's been a difficult situation, but I've always been passionate about fairness and just kind of waded into this by accident about 5-6 years ago, and have been very involved with the women's sports group for now 5 years, and have been speaking out. I tweet rigorously, perhaps more than I should, but I will not stop until we get some sense from the governing bodies that make the rules, particularly the IOC, who really could make such a difference in setting the rules for male and female categories, be very specific, and if those rules come from the top to the bottom, it's much easier to deal with it than the way IOC dealt with it, which is leaving it to the federations, leaving to the different sports to decide what the rules should be, and of course we have conflict. Ironically, tomorrow is 52 years of Title IX that would be overturned, when we obviously will have some male bodies competing in boxing, of all sports, in the Olympics. Enough said. So I'll turn it over now to somebody else.
Well, you're entirely right. I think on virtually every premise, especially that you said that this has become this hyper politicized issue, which I absolutely agree with you. It should not. Women's safety, women's privacy, women's opportunities should not be political. And so, last question for you: what is your message to the Biden-Harris administration as these Title IX regulations go into effect tomorrow?
I was assured by a person in the Biden administration that it would not affect sports, but we know better. It's a very long rewrite, and I just need to get to talk to somebody and talk some sense into them. I just don't think they really know what they're doing. In the famous words, forgive them, Lord, for they not know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. They have no idea how this affects women. A teacher taught me, if you don't know an issue, exaggerate it. You have a basketball team with 10 male players. You have a basketball team with 10 female players. Now, the 5 more players that did not make the men's team decide, okay, you know what, I'm going to try out for the women's team and see what happens. So now they make the women's team. So now what do you have? You have 15 male players on 2 basketball teams, and you have only 5 female players on 1 basketball team. So it just shows you how, if you allow this rule to go into effect, you will disallow and invalidate women in sports and make it very lopsided. So there's that. I just need to talk to somebody. I need to take some sense into them.
Well, we appreciate you. And if there's one person who can, we know it's you. And so thank you for joining the call, and again, for all of your advocacy, not just these past 2 years, but all you've done for women, especially women in sports, over the past, 50 years now. So thank you. Another key player who has been always, again, since I've been involved in this space, and again, much longer, who has always considered the impact of legislation on women and girls in sports, is Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville, also known as Coach. We have loved working with Coach. He has been such an ally and supporter of our fight to protect women's sports. He's made it a point to host roundtables with legal analysts and athletes to actually have productive dialogue about the overreach of the new Title IX rules. Back in 2022, Coach introduced the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act, and he is a co-sponsor of the Congressional Review Act resolution. And so, Coach and Senator Tuberville, thank you so much for joining the call today.
Thank you, Riley. Thanks for having me on. I spent, I guess, a little over 50 years, whether player or coach, and involved in athletics. And now that I'm in the U.S. Senate, I feel it a lot more because I'm around it and I hear it a lot. But tomorrow's a sad day for our country when it comes to sports. I've lived it, I've eaten and dreamed it all my life, and the positive things that have happened to many, many young men and women in sports is just, it's priceless. But tomorrow, the Biden and Harris Department of Education, they're going to take a sledgehammer, Title IX. And you and I have fought against this for a couple of years now. As you said, we've had bills on the floor. We've fought against it. But the Democrats keep fighting back, and they've had the ball in their court, and it's been tough for us to win. But, tomorrow women and girls will no longer have any safe spaces or protections. People should understand that, starting tomorrow. Girls will be forced to share locker rooms with boys. They're going to lose scholarship to boys. Girls could be in harm's way, as we've seen it with the boxing this week in the Olympics. Sadly, this woke ideology isn't confined to our country. It's all over the world, and it's growing. As we just said, this boxing, it's hard for me to watch, but we saw it coming when they announced they were going to allow men to participate against women in boxing in the Olympics. But, if the Biden and Harris have their way, boys will be boxing against girls in elementary schools in the very near future. That is their goal, is to basically eliminate women's sports. Democrats, they pretend that they care about women's rights, but, they're cheering as protection, scholarships, and opportunities have been stripped away and handed to men on a silver platter, and it is an absolute joke. Biden Harris Title IX they rewrite all the rules for Title IX, set us back years, and for months you and I have been saying this. This isn't about politics. This is about good versus evil. This is dead wrong. Title IX is one of the biggest and best things that's ever come out of Congress over 50 years ago. Access to resources, scholarships, opportunities for women as male athletes had already. And just look at the emergence of all the different women's sports over the years. I know in the SEC, women's softball is one of the most highly watched and participated sports in the South now. It's just unbelievable. But my colleagues, we've introduced a lot of bills to put this back into place, try to fix it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to take new leadership here in Washington, D.C. We cannot continue down this path with these people that have these bird brain ideas about men being able to get pregnant, men being able to give birth to kids. They have absolutely lost their mind, and I don't know what their end goal is, but people are catching up with this. Everywhere I go now, this is one of the topics of conversation. So we're going to continue to fight, and we're going to fight with all our might, and we will eventually win on this because it's the right thing to do.
Well, no doubt. Thank you, Coach. It has remained at the forefront of conversations because of people like you, making sure that it is there. So thank you. We appreciate you and, again, everything that you've done. We are thrilled to have one of your wonderful colleagues with us today. Up next on the call, Senator Joni Ernst from the great state of Iowa. Thank you so much for joining the call, Senator Ernst. You have been another one who has stood up for women. It's been a huge part of your work representing the people of Iowa. And you've been a champion for women, not just in the state, but really all across the nation. And so I want to thank you, and I would love for you to deliver some remarks, and so the floor is yours.
I am, Riley. Thank you. The Biden-Harris administration might not be able to define what a woman is, but they are waging a systematic and deliberate campaign to eliminate Title IX and destroy women's sports. 50 years ago, Title IX created opportunity and allowed girls across America to dream. And we're all watching the Olympics right now, and I can't help but think that we are all witnessing those dreams become reality for so many of our young female athletes. Because of the even playing field created under Title IX, the most decorated U.S. Olympian ahead of the Paris Games was swimmer Katie Ledecky. With 10 Olympic medals and 2 world records, it's clear her dominance in the pool is almost unmatched. But just think about it, folks. If Biden and Harris had their way, Katie Ledecky might have never earned a single medal for our nation had she been forced to compete against biological males. This is the definition of pushing women off the podium. And I know, Riley, you are all too familiar, and this is so sad, but you're all too familiar with how unfair the left's rules are. But the disastrous new Title IX rules attack much more than the power of sport. They also destroy the privacy of women's locker rooms by literally opening the door to biological men. The freedoms and equality earned under Title IX have given women the dignity and the power to do so much. Look no further than Iowan Caitlin Clark. After a record-breaking season on the court, she also shattered viewership records during the Women's NCAA Basketball Championship. That game ranked as the most watched basketball game of the past 5 years, including the NBA. And what an inspiration to the next generation of young women. So friends, I will not let Democrats roll the clock back 50 years. So that's why I'm fighting, why Cindy Hyde-Smith is fighting, why Virginia Foxx is fighting, and so many of us are fighting to protect girls' sports at the national level. And I am very proud to say, and I know you have a wonderful, wonderful relationship with her as well, Riley, that my governor in Iowa, Kim Reynolds, has taken similar action at the state level. Republicans are standing in the gap for our female athletes. We cannot and will not allow America's daughters to be sidelined by the Democrats' radical agenda. And so with that, Riley, thank you so much for all you do. You're such a champion. I want to thank the Independent Women's Forum as well. Thank you so much for all that you do. And we will continue championing our daughters, our females. So God bless you all. Certainly love you.
Well, thank you, Senator Ernst. That is definitely something I mentioned in your intro, is Iowa is unique in the way that you've got wonderful female representation in D.C., but you've got a wonderful female governor. You have a wonderful female Attorney General, Idgie Bird. So really great women leading the way for the rest of the nation. So thank you. Well, if Miss Virginia is ready, she has been another great ally of women's sports, and she's on the call today from the House side. She is the chairwoman of the House Committee on Education and the Workforce, and this, of course, is none other than Representative and Congresswoman Virginia Foxx. She represents the North Carolina's 5th District. Again, another great leader, calling on her colleagues in Congress to act and to protect women and to preserve Title IX. And so, Chairwoman Foxx, if you can hear us and if you're able to get the call working, thank you for joining us today, and we would love to hear from you.
Okay. Is that you, Riley?
This is me. Yes, ma'am.
Well, Riley, I'm sorry I heard the beginning of your comment, and I want to say thank you to you and the Independent Women's Forum and what you're doing through Outkicks to keep this issue front and center with the American people. I believe it is front and center, but you're helping to remind people of how awful the Biden-Harris administration has been with its Title IX rule allowing biological men to compete in women's athletics. You've lived it, but the committee, as you know, has been on the front lines fighting against it right along with you. We agree with you that the rule that has been proposed is a real slap in the face to women and girls who prepare for competition and now have to compete on an uneven playing field by competing against biological men. It's unjust. It's directly in conflict with athletics' core principles of integrity and fairness. Now, one of the first things we did in the 118th Congress was to have the Education Workforce Committee advance H.R. 734, the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Acts. But unfortunately, the bill is sitting on Schumer's desk and hasn't gone anywhere in the Senate. Recently, Representative Mary Miller from Illinois introduced and the committee passed H.J. Res. 165, which would repeal the Biden-Harris rule. Again, that legislation stuck on Schumer's desk. So while we're having trouble with legislative efforts to protect women in sports, we've been thwarted there. The committee's been vindicated by the courts. I'm not sure if you've said this in your comments or not, but federal courts have blocked the rule in 21 states and in many individual schools around the country. So the cases are going to continue to play out in the appeals courts and potentially the Supreme Court. So, as I said at the beginning, I thank the Independent Women's Forum for what it's doing, for what you're doing, and I want to encourage everybody to keep fighting. I'll keep fighting with you because this rule coming out of the Biden-Harris office is hurtful. It limits opportunities for women and girls, and is totally unacceptable. Those are my comments.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Foxx. If anyone will keep fighting, we know that it is you. And so thank you for being someone that we can rely on and we can count on. Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, again, one of the biggest supporters of women's sports. She is from the great state of Mississippi. Hotty toddy. She in the Senate in June, she introduced a Congressional Review Act resolution to overturn the Biden-Harris administration's unlawful Title IX rule. Earlier this month, the House passed this CRA resolution, introduced again by Representative Mary Miller. But now all eyes are on the Senate, as you just heard. The Senate is expected to consider Hyde-Smith's Title IX CRA in the coming weeks. There is mounting pressure from the public, who I know is calling and emailing their senators daily, asking to protect Title IX and in turn protecting women by supporting the CRA. If passed by the Senate, this legislation would be advanced to the Biden-Harris White House. And so, Senator, thank you so much for your continued efforts to protect women's sports and women's spaces. We would love to hear from you.
Well, thank you so very much, and I'm thrilled to be on this call with you. We're between votes right now, and that's okay. I've got time to do this, and I'm going to make sure I take time, every opportunity that comes my way to talk about this. Yes, last month, Senator Cassidy and I introduced the CRA joint resolution of the disapproval, and as you well know, the CRA it's a tool that we use in Congress that can use to overturn certain federal agency actions, and so that's our goal there. And we actually have 34 co-sponsors now, and this particular one, the good thing about this, Riley, and the rest of you, is it's just a simple majority to pass it. You know, so many times we have to have 60 votes, but this is just a simple majority. And the measure that passed on the House side, it passed on July the 11th, and that just brought us one close step closer to putting majority in Congress on the record as opposing these radical changes. This is so frustrating for me. I mean, this is just a no-brainer. It makes no sense that we are actually spending time having conversations on whether men can participate in women's sports. I'm not very diplomatic about this at all. I just think of the simplest thing anyone can see is how ridiculous this is. And, to putting the regulations in Title IX that just stretch the law beyond reason, it ignores science, it ignores basic biological facts, it infringes on the rights of parents, of teachers, and to know things or to be able to say things to the parents, and it's just so backwards. It is insane that we are allowing things like this to hurt women and girls, and by just stripping away their opportunities and rights that we've enjoyed for decades. Title IX was so wonderful when it came about, and I just thought we will never have to worry about this again. And here we are using the term biological male. That's the only kind of male there is. And there's two sexes, there's two chromosomes, and as you can see, I get pretty worked up about this stuff. I say all the time, my mother was a point guard, I was a point guard, my daughter was a point guard. We're all in on this. I was just showing my staff an old tennis picture of mine that they got a really good laugh out of in college for my freshman year and sophomore years. There is no reason that America should not be up in arms over this. Where are the women's organizations? Where are the people that are fighting for women? They're nowhere to be found. This is the most ridiculous thing I literally have ever dealt with, not only in public life, in my entire life, that we're having to fight this battle. So, the bottom line is the Biden administration is in its blind goal of being as woke as possible. They're just casting away the safety, the rights of women. And just like everyone else on this call, we're not going to stand for this. So I know that I'm brutal and I'm rough and gruff, but by gosh, it's time to be. And I just thank you for the opportunity to share my views. I will testify anytime I have the opportunity, and luckily I have had a couple of times to testify to committees that I'm not on how ridiculous this is. I'm here to protect girls and women's sports and to use the full authority power as me as a U.S. Senator to fight this tooth and nail. And I'm so glad that I have folks like on this call that are standing with me, because it's ridiculous that we're having to, but it is what it is, and we're where we are. So just know that I so appreciate everyone on this call. Thank you for being here for such a ridiculous subject matter that we're talking about. And we're going to win this. We're going to get on the other side of this, because I'm not stopping till we do, and I know you're not either. So I'm sorry to be so lengthy, but I just get really worked up over this. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, I probably speak for everyone, and when I say there's no better sound to my ears than a worked up Mississippi accent. So thank you. We appreciate you more than you know. And I think you speak for a lot of us in how you communicate really so plainly. So thank you. We have talked to many members of Congress, of course, lots of our wonderful senators down in D.C., but we want to consider this from all angles. We've got some athletes on the call, but from the legal perspective, on this call listening, we have May Melman. She is the policy director at the Independent Women's Law Center, really doing amazing work there. But we also have Cameron Norris. Cam is a partner with Congresswoman McCarthy, representing Independent Women's Law Center, and the states in Alabama versus Cardona. He's also counsel in Tennessee versus Cardona. And so, Cameron, can you give us a little bit more insight into these two cases and what we should be expecting from the many cases that we have seen introduced across the country?
Yeah, absolutely, and good to be with everybody today. I am a lawyer on two of the many, many cases that have been filed challenging the Biden administration's Title IX rule. And really today is an important day in terms of how those cases are going to go, and I'll get into that in a minute. But there have been several lawsuits, almost a dozen lawsuits filed pretty quickly, challenging the rule as soon as it came out. And in those lawsuits, 7 trial courts have actually ruled on the legality of the Title IX rule, whether it's consistent with the statute and Congress's original purposes and whether it makes any sense and it's arbitrary, and all those things are being litigated. And of those 7 district courts, 6 have frozen the rule, finding that it's likely illegal in full. And so those cases are typically brought on behalf of states. There are 26 states total that are challenging the rule in court. 21 of those states, the rule is not going to go into effect in those states because they were successful in their litigation. 4 states, which is Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, in the case that we're helping bring on behalf of IWF and others, they temporarily lost in the trial court, but their case is currently on appeal. So the rule is not going into effect in at least 21 states, which means it is going into effect in all those states that did not bring a lawsuit challenging it, which is still unfortunate for schools and students and athletes in those jurisdictions. So far, of those trial court decisions freezing the rule, 2 have been appealed, and both appellate courts agreed that the rule is likely unlawful and should remain frozen as well. And then today, just today, we got another decision out of Oklahoma freezing the rule in the state of Oklahoma. So that may bring us up to 22 states where the rule is frozen. But those 2 appellate courts were reviewing one of my cases, the one that's led by Tennessee, as well as a case that's led by Louisiana. And in those cases, despite winning on appeal, the Justice Department has taken those cases to the U.S. Supreme Court. And that U.S. Supreme Court litigation is fully briefed. And so the United States Supreme Court will get to weigh in, at least in part, on the legality of the Title IX rule very shortly. I mean, it could be as soon as today when that decision comes out. The other injunctions, some of them have not been appealed by the government. There's one out of Kansas that's being appealed currently, and we're still waiting for a decision. And there, as I mentioned, the one that we are on, which is led by the state of Alabama, we just appealed yesterday and are asking here on the last day before the rule goes into effect, are asking the appellate court to freeze it for those 4 remaining states that challenge it as well. So lots of litigation has been largely successful, but these courts, when they say that the Title IX rule is unlawful, what they've been doing is only freezing it in the states that actually bring those cases. So that means that the rule will go into effect tomorrow for about half of the country, but it will not in about the other half.
Right. Well, thank you, Tim. Very comprehensive. It helps shed light on what impact has been had and where we can continue working and improving. So we appreciate you and your fight. We've talked to, like I said, many members of the House and Senate. We have our last senator who is here to talk with us today. She is also a co-sponsor of the CRA and is the first woman to represent the beautiful state of Wyoming. And so, Senator Cynthia Lummis, thank you so much for joining us today and for your support to overturn the Biden-Harris Title IX rules and protect women's sex-based rights. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you so much for discussing this absolutely critical subject the day before this rule change is supposed to take effect. The big concerns that I have is that the rule applies to bathrooms, locker rooms, and shower areas, which means that schools and colleges could lose federal funding if they require students to use the facilities corresponding to their biological sex. And then it also expands the definition of sexual harassment to include addressing someone with a pronoun that aligns with his or her sex, but conflicts with his or her preferred gender. This is bending the norms of life that have existed for millennia. And because of a fad in expanding the 1% of people who genuinely suffer from gender dysphoria to cover people who are caught up in the fad, is changing and putting on its head the rights of everyday American girls and women who want privacy in the locker rooms, who don't want to be put in a position where a potential sexual predator has gained access to their locker room under the ruse of gender dysphoria and seeking a gender identity or claiming a gender identity that is different from their biological sex. I can't thank the women on this call enough. Riley Gaines, you and your colleagues who have brought common sense to this issue and have been willing to talk openly about the competitive disadvantages for women of having to compete against biological men, but also the concerns about what's going on in the locker rooms and behind the scenes and in areas that should be reserved for the privacy of women athletes, women competitors. And this pronoun issue is absurd. I have a friend who is a physician who addressed a patient by a pronoun that corresponded to her birth sex, but not her preferred pronoun. And the doctor had to have training on how to behave at the hospital. And then she said, I will no longer see a patient who will not tell me in advance what they want to be called. And if they won't say, I won't see them. And this physician is practicing in a very liberal state. And she said, all I want to do is come back to Wyoming and practice where people know who they are. And we don't have to pretend that this fad is legitimate. The problem is the rule that has been proposed by the Biden-Harris administration does allow people to pretend. And it is debilitating to our moral standards, to our values, and to our privacy as women. And so subjecting students that are attending schools and colleges that accept federal funding and subject them to this kind of locker room situation, shower situation, bathroom situation, simply because they're student athletes, is absurd. This is the Biden-Harris administration going way too far. This is corrupting the moral norms of the United States. I feel very strongly that Riley Gaines and women and girls who are willing to step out and challenge these norms or these alterations of norms are the real winners, the real leaders, and I commend their work. I'm on your side and want to do everything I can to re-normalize the conventional norms and moral society that has always been the United States of America.
Okay, amazing. We can move on to Payton McNabb. This is another athlete, again, another ambassador for the Independent Women's Forum. She has also become a dear friend of mine. There's a video, I'm sure many of you have seen it. It went incredibly viral, of Payton. It's been seen worldwide. She is a former three-sport high school athlete who was severely injured by a male playing on the women's volleyball court. We all know that there is a risk when playing sports, but the severity and the likelihood of injury increases tenfold when you put a man on the court, on the field, against a woman. And so, Payton, thank you for joining us today. Would you just share a little bit about how your life changed because of a boy competing in the girls division?
Yeah, so I had a lot of plans for my future. I grew up playing sports. I was a three-sport athlete my whole life. I've come from a big athletic family. And, yeah, that was like that's the only thing I did. So I was a year-round athlete. I had the hopes of competing one day in college. I went into my senior year excited to have a normal year because COVID kind of messed up the rest of my high school. And on the first week of school, I was severely injured in that volleyball game. So that took me out of the rest of my final season of volleyball, and it made it difficult for me to continue playing sports for the remainder of the year. So not only was there a big loss there, but it's also all these medical things that I'm still having to deal with almost 2 years later.
Would you share some of the medical issues that you're having or that you experienced initially?
Once I got hit, I was knocked out unconscious for about 30 seconds while in a fencing position, which is how your body reacts to a brain injury. Once I came to, my adrenaline was pumping, but I couldn't remember anything, and I went to the doctor a couple days later, and they informed me that I had a concussion, brain bleed, and permanent whiplash. And there's a lot of things that come from that. I had partial paralysis on my right side, vision problems, cognitive issues, having to get extra help in school, which is something that I've never had to deal with prior to this happening to me. And there's just a lot of, like, my body is still hurt and it's still trying to heal, and it's been almost 2 years, and it's just completely, it was just completely avoidable, so it's really frustrating to still be having to deal with those issues.
No doubt about that, and agreed, it was entirely avoidable, yet we have leaders who are effectively telling you that your safety doesn't matter. But we appreciate you in the fight that you've put up these past 2 years, a fight you should have never had to endure.
This issue is it's obviously a lot greater than me. I just think the Lord had a plan for me, and I'm just going to continue to keep fighting for my sister and all the other female athletes and just females in general that just deserve these basic rights that are getting taken away from us.
No doubt. I think now we are going to open it, Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, but to questions from the media.
Yep. Yep, we have time for about 1 or 2 questions from the media.
Hi, thanks for doing this call. I appreciate it. I have a question for Cameron about the math regarding the lawsuits that are being filed against Title IX. He said that six federal judges or federal courts, district courts have ruled against the Biden administration's rule. Does that include Oklahoma today, or does Oklahoma make it 7?
So I think this is May Mailman jumping in, the director of the Independent Women's Law Center, that Cam was speaking in a pre-Oklahoma world. So now that would be 7. So we actually count the math as 9 courts, because if you count all of the district courts plus the 2 courts of appeals, you have 9 separate courts saying that this is illegal.
Can I read you the courts that I have listed and tell me which one I'm missing? Because I think I'm missing one. I've got the Texas court, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, and Missouri.
2 Texas courts. So there are 2 cases in Texas. There's Carroll ISD, and then there's the state of Texas.
Okay, so there was the Carroll ISB case. Okay, then plus for the entire state. Filed by Ken Paxton. Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for everyone who joined. That concludes today's call hosted by Independent Women's Forum. Please visit IWF.org for more information and to follow our work on Title IX. For any follow-up questions for any of our speakers on today's call, please email press@IWF.org.